Civilians try to flee but are forced to turn back as Russian missiles keep coming. An agreed ceasefire wasn't followed on a day when Russia continued its apparently indiscriminate bombing. And President Putin issues another stern warning to the West.
Now we are hearing that a no-fly zone must be established over the territory of Ukraine. But any move in this direction will be viewed by us as a participation in the armed conflict.
Also, America's Secretary of State visits refugees on Ukraine's border as numbers head towards 1.5 million. And Manchester City's Alexander Zinchenko holds back tears as he explains how his fellow Ukrainians are suffering.
When you're watching the people, how they fight for their lives, there is no words, you know.
Good evening. A temporary ceasefire in Ukraine's southern city of Mariupol to allow civilians to flee was broken today. In fact, it was never really allowed to begin, and those hoping to get out had to stay put. Ukraine still controls the port city despite intense attacks by Russian forces who have it surrounded. And there was another chilling warning from President Putin today as Ukraine appeals again for a no-fly zone. Any country that did so, Mr. Putin said, would be in military conflict with Russia. Our first report tonight comes from Romilly Weeks in Ukraine, which does contain some distressing images.
Within sight of this church outside Mariupol, the shells are still raining down. Even the religious will be asking, where is God here? The Russians say they aren't targeting civilians. This is 18-month-old Kryl. In what's left of a hospital in this besieged city. No one heard his parents' prayers today. Why? His mother's desperate cry. This on a day residents were promised humanitarian corridors to safety, but only the birds were allowed to flee, as Russia reneged on even that.
It is awful. We were eager to move people to their homes, to their flats, to safe places, because it's not possible to evacuate people under continuous shelling.
Most of those trying to escape the smoking ruins of Volnovakha were also turned back today, returning to a town that barely exists.
Humanitarian corridors must work today to save people, women, children, the elderly, to give food and medicine to those who remain.
As Ukraine's president pleaded again for NATO to introduce a no-fly zone, from the comfort of Moscow, President Putin threatened this. Any move in that direction will be seen by us as participation in the armed conflict. It will not matter what members they are. From the outskirts of Kyiv, many more are trying to flee, arriving exhausted in Lviv in the west.
Lviv is a city untouched so far by any shelling or bombardment, but touched by war in every other way. And this is what it looks like. Hundreds of people arriving here every single day, bringing with them their young children, their babies, their pets, trying to pack their lives into small suitcases.
In Kherson, the only city that Russia has taken so far, residents stage these courageous protests. Ukraine is taking comfort in these expressions of defiance. They need to when their reality is filled with scenes like this. Romilly Weeks, ITV News in Lviv.
A detailed look now at the latest situation in Ukraine on the second weekend of the Russian invasion. The failed ceasefire in Mariupol leaves the situation there unchanged. The city is surrounded and under bombardment, but still under Ukraine's control. Elsewhere in the south, Russian troops have reached the Dnipro River and continue to attack Mykolaiv, where Ukrainian forces have repelled several assaults. And up towards the north, the Russians have opened a new corridor from the east towards the capital, Kyiv. Let's go to Kyiv then, and our Europe editor James Mate is there. James, 10 days now since President Putin launched this invasion. I'm interested in your take on what President Putin was saying today to the West in no uncertain terms.
Well, he was, but it's not a great surprise because, frankly, a lot of Western politicians have been saying exactly the same thing. It is pretty clear that if NATO aircraft were to get involved in the airspace over Ukraine and enforce a no-fly zone, which would presumably involve shooting down Russian aircraft, that would be seen as involvement in this conflict and an act of war. And before you know it, you would have a conflict between NATO and Russia. And I think that's why this is completely off the table. However much President Zelensky has been pleading for it, angrily saying last night, look, if you don't give us a no-fly zone, then all future deaths in this conflict can be put at NATO's door. Now, this is clearly an overstatement and possibly designed to help him, in fact, get more in terms of arms, anti-aircraft weapons, possibly even drones or actual fighter aircraft themselves.
OK, James, in Kyiv, thank you very much for that. Ukraine's President Zelensky has continued to communicate with the world from his bunker in Kyiv, managing to address protesters in Tbilisi in Georgia last night, and then today the US Congress, though not in the chamber, on a private video call.